There's a moment in the Gospel of Thomas, a text banned from the canon and buried in the sands of Egypt for nearly 2,000 years, where Jesus says something so strange, so illuminating, that most readers skip past it in confusion. He tells his disciples, "Whoever comes to understand the world finds only a corpse, but whoever has found the corpse, the world is not worthy of him." It is a sentence that has haunted mystics and scholars for centuries, because when you read it with the eyes of the ordinary mind, it sounds dark, even unsettling. But when you read it with the eyes of the initiate, it becomes a doorway, an initiation into a radically different relationship with death, life, and the hidden architecture of existence. This video is about that doorway. Tonight, we're not here to explore death as a biological event. We're not here to discuss doctrines or dogmas about what happens after the heart stops beating. We're here to uncover a far older, far deeper teaching, one that Jesus hinted at again and again, but which only the inner circle ever truly grasped. A teaching that reveals death is not an ending, but a mechanism, not a punishment, but a process, not the great terror of humanity, but the very key to spiritual awakening. And here's the bold claim. If you understand what Jesus was actually pointing to, beneath the parables, beneath the symbols, beneath the layers of translation and reinterpretation, it could completely rewire the way you experience life itself. Your fears shift, your priorities rearrange, even the way you perceive your own identity begins to crack open. In this video, we will explore the forgotten context behind Jesus' secret teaching on death, the esoteric philosophy hidden beneath his words, and why this knowledge was preserved only in fragments, whispers, and Gnostic riddles for almost 2 millennia. We'll journey into ancient texts, symbolic language, and inner technologies of consciousness. And by the end, you may never look at death or life the same way again. To understand Jesus' hidden teaching on death, we have to step outside the familiar walls of Sunday school Christianity and enter the shadowed corridors of early mystical traditions, those raw, unpolished decades before institutions shaped the narrative. Picture the Mediterranean world in the 1st century, a swirling crossroads of cultures, philosophies, and esoteric schools. Egypt, Greece, Persia, Judea, each carried its own vision of the soul, the afterlife, and the mysteries of human existence. And it was here, in this spiritual crucible, that Jesus' teachings emerged, not in isolation, but in conversation with a vast tapestry of ancient wisdom. While the canonical Gospels present a simplified public message, the earliest followers, those later called Gnostics, meaning knowers, believed Jesus had 2 levels of teaching. The first was for the crowds, simple parables, moral lessons, stories with clear shapes. But beneath these was the second layer, the inner teaching, reserved only for those prepared to handle paradox, symbolic language, and the unsettling truths of consciousness. This was not unusual. Schools like the Essenes, the Pythagoreans, and the mystery cults operated in the same 2-tiered structure: public myth on the surface, transformative knowledge beneath it. Death, in these traditions, was never merely the shutting down of a body. It was an initiatory threshold, a metaphor, a ritual, a psychological passage designed to dissolve the false identity so a deeper self could emerge. In Egypt, the priest spoke of dying before dying. In Greek mystery rites, the initiate symbolically entered the underworld to confront the illusion of the ego. So, when Jesus spoke in cryptic lines about taking up your cross, losing your life to save it, or the dead burying the dead, his listeners would have understood these as coded invitations, phrases pointing not to physical events, but to states of inner transformation. But something happened in the centuries that followed. As the early Christian movement evolved into a structured institution, the emphasis shifted. The mystical dimension, fluid, symbolic, experiential, was replaced with literal interpretations suitable for governing large populations. Teachings that encouraged personal awakening were streamlined into doctrines meant for uniform belief. And so, the deeper conversation about death, Jesus' insistence that it was an inner process, a psychological rebirth, something to be embraced rather than feared, began to fade. Only fragments survived, hidden in outlawed texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Dialogue of the Savior, and the Gospel of Mary. These writings describe a Jesus who teaches not about escape from death, but mastery over it, not about waiting for a future resurrection, but awakening to one now. Why was this suppressed? Because a population that no longer fears death becomes difficult to control. A person who has died before dying cannot be manipulated with threats of punishment or promises of reward. They become free, utterly, inconveniently free. And it is in this forgotten stream of wisdom that Jesus' secret teaching on death reveals its true purpose: to liberate the human being from the cycle of fear, illusion, and unconscious living. Not someday, not after the grave, but right here, in the very act of being alive. To enter Jesus' secret teaching on death, we must start with a simple but radical idea. The death he spoke of most often was not physical. It was psychological. It was existential. It was the death of a self that most of us don't even realize we're carrying. This becomes clear when we look at Jesus' most paradoxical statements. Let the dead bury their dead. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. These are not instructions for martyrdom. They are descriptions of a process, an inner movement where the false identity collapses, allowing a deeper nature to emerge. To understand this, imagine the self you walk around with, the fears you inherited from childhood, the stories you tell about who you think you are, the roles you cling to because they give you a sense of stability. That bundle of memories, reactions, and learned defenses is what ancient mystics called the lesser self, the old man, the ego shell. And according to Jesus, this is the self that must die, not as punishment, not as sacrifice, but as metamorphosis. Just as a seed must split open to reveal the life hidden inside, the psychological shell around your true nature has to crack. It has to end. And this ending, this rupture of the small self, is what Jesus called death. But here is the secret. It can happen while you're still alive. In fact, it must. This is why he said, "No one can enter the kingdom unless they are born again," a phrase that later generations took literally, but which in the original language means born from above, born from a higher level of consciousness. Now, to teach this transformation, Jesus used the same techniques as the ancient mystery schools: metaphor, shock, paradox, and symbolic death. He placed his students in situations that revealed their attachments. He used impossible teachings: turn the other cheek, love your enemy, take no thought for your life, not as moral rules, but as tools. Tools designed to expose the ego's grip. Why? Because the ego's greatest fear is powerlessness, and its ultimate fear is death. By confronting these fears directly, the disciple begins to witness the ego's illusions. The false self starts to crumble. This is the inner crucifixion, not the physical one, but the collapse of the self that thinks it is separate, fragile, and alone. In early mystical Christianity, this was known as the little death, a voluntary surrendering of the old identity, a clearing of the inner ground. And here we find the first great key to Jesus' secret teaching. You do not fear physical death. You fear the death of who you think you are. Everything else, your anxieties, your obsessions, your compulsions, the stories you replay over and over in your mind, flows from this hidden terror. It is why people cling to routines, relationships, beliefs, even suffering, because the ego would rather endure pain than face annihilation. But Jesus' message was not, fear death. His message was, pass through it. The cross, in its earliest symbolic meaning, was not about torture. It was about transformation. It was the intersection of the horizontal, your human life, and the vertical, the higher dimension of the soul breaking through. The moment the small self dissolves, the larger self awakens. This is why Jesus constantly reassured his disciples, fear not. Death has no hold on you. You are not the body. You are not the world. He wasn't speaking poetically. He was describing a state of consciousness they had not yet entered. And yet, he knew they could enter it, if they understood the secret. In part 2, we'll go deeper into the hidden meanings behind Jesus' resurrection, the misunderstood nature of the second death, and the esoteric mechanics of spiritual rebirth that were removed from mainstream teachings. To truly grasp Jesus' hidden teaching on death, we must confront the most dramatic symbol in the entire Christian story, the resurrection. For centuries, it has been framed as a supernatural event meant to prove divinity. But in the esoteric traditions, the resurrection is not merely an event. It is a map, a psychological blueprint, a mystical diagram of the inner transformation every seeker must undergo. And here's the secret. The resurrection story is not about what happens after you die. It's about what happens when the false self dies while you're still alive. Let's begin with the empty tomb, one of the most misunderstood symbols in all spiritual literature. In the mystical reading, the tomb represents the inner chamber of the mind, the place where the ego self is buried. When Mary Magdalene arrives at dawn to find it empty, this is not just a historical moment. It is the moment the disciple realizes the old identity is gone. The world she knew can no longer contain the truth she has awakened to. This is why Jesus appears in a form she does not recognize. After spiritual death, the self is not what it once was. It cannot be contained in memory, in labels, or in old narratives. The resurrection appearance is symbolic of a consciousness reborn, a self that is no longer bound by the psychological limitations of fear and identity. A self that is, in the language of the mystics, freed from the second death. And this phrase, the second death, is another forgotten key. In esoteric Christianity, the first death is the death of the body. The second death is the collapse of the false self before physical death occurs. Most people go to the grave without ever experiencing this inner death. They live and die inside their ego shell, never realizing that the cage was unlocked the whole time. But for the mystic, the second death is liberation. It is the moment you stop identifying with the stories your mind tells you, the moment you realize those stories were never you to begin with. This is why Jesus declared, "If anyone keeps my word, they will never see death." He didn't mean physical immortality. He meant that once you have died to the egoic self, the fear of death evaporates. There is no you left to be threatened. This is also the deeper meaning behind his statement, "I have overcome the world." The world here does not refer to the planet or society. In Greek, the word is cosmos, the constructed reality, the mental matrix, the illusion created by the ego's perceptions. To overcome the world is to see through it, to understand that the world as the ego sees it is not the real one, to awaken from the dream. And now we return to the enigmatic line from the Gospel of Thomas. Whoever comes to understand the world finds only a corpse. What is this corpse? It is the dead world of appearances, the world constructed by the ego and assumed to be real. When you wake up from it, you see it for what it is: empty, impermanent, a shadow play built from conditioning. But whoever has found the corpse, the world is not worthy of him. In other words, once you realize the egoic world is an illusion, you are no longer bound by it. You cannot be manipulated by fear. You cannot be controlled by desire. You no longer mistake the temporary for the eternal. This is the state Jesus called the kingdom. Not a place, but a perception. A shift in consciousness. A way of seeing that is free from the tyranny of the small self. And here lies the paradox at the heart of his secret teaching. You cannot truly live until the ego dies. And when the ego dies, you discover you were never truly alive before. This is the hidden mechanics of spiritual rebirth. This is the meaning beneath the resurrection. This is what was lost when teachings became literal and institutions replaced experience with belief. Now, in the next section, we will bring all of this down to earth with practical techniques, exercises, and inner rituals that allow you to begin this process of dying before you die and awakening to the consciousness Jesus referred to as life eternal. Now that we've explored the hidden architecture of Jesus' teaching on death, the question becomes, how do we experience this transformation ourselves? How do we undergo the second death, the death of the false self, while still alive? This isn't about adopting new beliefs or memorizing spiritual phrases. It's about inner practice, the kind of work early disciples were trained to do in private. What follows are practical, grounded exercises that echo these ancient methods, techniques that help dissolve the ego's grip and awaken the deeper consciousness Jesus pointed toward. 1. The death of the story, the silent witness practice. At the heart of the ego lies a simple mechanism. It confuses your story with yourself. So the first practice is witnessing. Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes and observe the stream of thoughts passing through your mind. Memories, worries, self-criticisms, conversations that never happened, arguments from years ago. It will all rise up like ghosts. Your task is not to change the thoughts, but to do something far more powerful. See that you are not the one thinking them. Stay in the position of the witness. Imagine each thought dissolving into mist the moment you notice it. This practice reveals the first crack in the ego's shell. It creates distance. It shows you that the you who observes cannot be the you who fears death. The true self is untouched, eternal, spacious. This is the beginning of the inner resurrection. 2. The ego's burial, letting a fear die. Choose one fear, just one, that shapes your decisions. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being alone, fear of uncertainty. For one day, act as if that fear no longer exists. If your fear is rejection, speak honestly. If your fear is failure, attempt something imperfectly. If your fear is loss, release something small you cling to. The ego sustains itself through avoidance. When you stop feeding the fear, it weakens. A small part of the false self dies. This practice echoes Jesus' teaching. Do not worry about your life. It's not about recklessness. It's about loosening the chains that keep the ego intact. 3. The cross as inner alignment, the vertical breath. In early mystical Christianity, the cross symbolized the meeting point of two dimensions: the horizontal, human life, time, identity, and the vertical, presence, eternity, the higher self. Try this breath ritual. On the inhale, imagine a vertical line of light moving up through your spine. On the exhale, Visualize a horizontal line expanding outward from your heart. Inhale, the eternal dimension. Exhale, the human dimension. After several breaths, allow the two lines to form the cross within you. This centers the mind and opens the heart. It activates what the mystics called the inner kingdom, a state where the ego relaxes and the deeper consciousness emerges. 4. The daily resurrection. A nightly self-release before sleep. Sit for 2 minutes and reflect on the day. Ask yourself, what identity did I protect today? What reaction belonged to the old self? What can I let die tonight? Then, visualize each attachment dissolving. Feel the weight of the day dropping from you. This mirrors the ancient teaching of dying daily, a practice Paul himself spoke of, a purification of identity to make space for the reborn consciousness. 5. The ultimate shift, seeing through the world. Once a day, pause and look at something ordinary, a street, a shop, a person walking past, and remind yourself, this is the world the ego created. It is not the whole of reality. This simple reframing creates a subtle, powerful detachment. It weakens the illusion Jesus called the world, the mental projection mistaken for truth. These practices are not dramatic. They are gentle, precise, and persistent, designed to wear down the ego the way water wears down stone. Over time, you begin to feel lighter, more present, less reactive. The fear of death loosens, not because you've convinced yourself of something, but because the one who feared it is fading. In the end, Jesus' secret teaching on death was never about the end of the body. It was about the end of illusion. He wasn't pointing us toward a distant heaven or a promised future event. He was pointing us inward, toward a transformation available here, now, in this very breath. He wanted his followers to understand that the greatest fear humanity carries is not the fear of physical death, but the fear of letting go of the identity we believe ourselves to be. This is why he spoke in paradox, why he shattered expectations, why he called his disciples to lose their lives in order to truly find them. The death he spoke of is the collapse of the story self, the constructed identity that has been built from every fear, every wound, every memory, every belief we've inherited or adopted. And the resurrection he modeled is the awakening that occurs when that false identity falls away and reveals the deeper reality beneath it. If you truly grasp this, nothing in your life remains the same. Fear loosens, attachment softens, perspective shifts. You begin to feel a quiet liberation, a spaciousness that doesn't depend on circumstances, validation, or control. This is the state Jesus called the kingdom within. Not a place, but a perception, a way of seeing that arises when the ego dies and the deeper self takes its first breath. So as you leave this video, I invite you to carry one question with you, one that has the power to unravel your internal world and rebuild it from truth. What part of me is ready to die so that something truer can finally be born? Sit with that. Let it echo. Let it carve gentle openings in the walls you've built around your own heart. And when you feel that shift, even the smallest crack in the shell of the old self, recognize it for what it is, your own resurrection beginning. If this journey stirred something within you, consider sharing your reflections below. And if you're ready to explore more hidden teachings, more ancient wisdom, and more inner alchemy, you know where to find the next doorway. Until then, walk gently, die daily,